The Persian leaders, Anabasis and Memnon, now conferred and decided that as things stood, they could not hold out long under siege. They could see that part of the wall had already fallen and other parts were weakened by battering. Many of their men had been killed in the sorties, and many others incapacitated by wounds. In view of all this, round about the second watch of the night, they burned the wooden tower which they in turn had constructed to counter the enemy engines, and the arsenals too, in which their missiles were stored. They also set fire to the houses near the wall. Other houses caught alight from the huge blaze created by the arsenals and the tower, assisted by a wind in that direction. They themselves made a retreat either to the fortress on the island or to the citadel called Salmacis. When this was reported to Alexander by some men who took the opportunity to desert, and he could see the spread of the fire for himself, even though this was happening at about midnight, he nevertheless led out his Macedonians and killed those who were still setting fires in the city. His orders were that any Halicarnassians found in their houses should be spared. Dawn was now breaking, and he could survey the strongholds which the Persians and the mercenaries had occupied. He decided against besieging them, thinking that he would waste much time on them because of the nature of the ground, and that there was no great point now that he had taken the whole city. He buried those who had been killed during the night and ordered the officers in charge of the siege train to take it back to Tralles. He then razed the city to the ground and set out himself for Phrygia, leaving behind as a garrison for Halicarnassus and the rest of Caria a force of 3,000 mercenary infantry and some 200 cavalry under the command of Ptolemy. As satrap of all of Caria, he appointed Ada, the daughter of Hecatomnos and wife of Hydrius. He was both her brother and her consort, as is the Carian custom. On his death, Hydrius had handed over power to Ada. Ever since Semiramis' female rule over men had been an accepted institution in Asia. Pixodaris had then driven her out of her position and taken power himself. On his death, his son-in-law, Anabasis, was sent by the king to assume the Carian satrapy. Ada was left with only Alinda as her domain, the strongest fortress in Caria. When Alexander invaded Caria, she went to meet him, offering to surrender Alinda and adopting Alexander as her son. Alexander handed back Alinda to her and did not refuse to be called her son. Then, when he had destroyed Halicarnassus and taken control of the rest of Caria, he gave her rule over the whole country. Some of the Macedonians in Alexander's expedition had been recently married before the campaign. Alexander thought he should take care of these men and sent them back from Caria to spend the winter with their wives in Macedonia, putting them in the charge of Ptolemy, the son of Seleucus, one of the royal bodyguards, and two of his generals, Coenus the son of Polymocrates, and Meleager the son of Neoptolemus, as they too were among the newly married. A further instruction was that, when they returned and brought back the group they had escorted, they should have recruited as many cavalry and foot soldiers as they could from Macedonia. This one act ensured Alexander's popularity among the Macedonians as much as any other. He also sent Cleander, the son of Polymocrates, to recruit troops in the Peloponnese. He dispatched Parmenion to Sardis with a squadron of companion cavalry, the Thessalian cavalry, the other allies, and the wagons. His orders were then to proceed from Sardis to Phrygia. He himself moved towards Lycia and Pamphylia to gain control of the coast and so deny the enemy any use of their navy. On his route, he first came to the fortress of Hyparna, where there was a mercenary garrison, and took it in one assault, allowing the mercenaries to leave the citadel under safe conduct. Then, as he entered Lycia, he won over the people of Telmissus by agreement, and having crossed the river Xanthus, he received the submission of Penara, the city of Xanthus, Patara, and about 30 smaller towns. By this stage, it was already the depth of winter, but Alexander pressed on into the region known as Milyas, which belongs to Greater Phrygia, but at the time was counted as part of Lycia by decree of the great king. Here, envoys from Phasaelis came to offer friendship and to crown Alexander with a golden crown. Envoys making similar overtures were also sent by most of the lower Lycians. Alexander told the Phasaelites and the Lycians to hand over their cities to the officers he would dispatch for that purpose, and all were handed over. A little later, he came in person to Phasaelis and helped the inhabitants to destroy a strong fort. which had been held by Pisidians to threaten the district, and was used as a base from which the barbarians caused much damage to the Phasilite farmers. While Alexander was still in the area of Phaselis, it was reported to him that Alexander, the son of Aeropus, was conspiring against him. He was not only one of the companions, but also at the time the commander of the Thessalian cavalry. This Alexander was the brother of Heromenes and Anabasis, who had been party to the murder of Philip. He himself was implicated at the time, but Alexander had absolved him, as he was one of the first of his friends to rally around him after Philip's death, and had gone armed at his side when Alexander entered the palace. Later, Alexander held him in an honored position in his entourage, sent him to be his general in Thrace, and appointed him to the commander of the Thessalian cavalry when Callas, the previous commander, was posted to a satrapy. This is how the plot came to be reported. When Amyntas deserted to Darius, bringing proposals and a letter from this Alexander, Darius sent Sisinnes, a Persian in his intimate circle, down to the coast on the pretext of visiting Attizius, the satrap of Phrygia. But his real mission was to meet this Alexander and offer him assurances that, if he were to kill Alexander the king, Darius would install him as king of Macedonia and present him with 1,000 talents of gold as well as the kingdom. Sisinnes was captured by Parmenion and told him the purpose of his mission. Parmenion sent him under guard to Alexander, and Alexander heard the same story from him. Alexander convened his council of friends and put the question of what should be done about his namesake Alexander. His companions gave it as their view that it had been a mistake in the first place for him to assign the best of their cavalry to a man of dubious loyalty, and that now it was imperative to get rid of him as soon as possible, before he could form yet closer relations with the Thessalians and use them for some revolutionary purpose. And they were also alarmed by an omen. Apparently, when Alexander was still besieging Halicarnassus and was taking a midday rest, a swallow had flitted about over his head, chirping loudly and settled here and there on his bed, giving voice in a more than usually insistent way. Alexander was too exhausted to wake up, but the sound bothered him in his sleep, and he brushed the swallow away with a light sweep of his hand. Far from flying off at this touch, the bird perched right on Alexander's head and kept going on until he was completely awake. Alexander took this business of the swallow seriously and recounted it to Aristander of Telmissus, a seer. Aristander told him that it signified a plot by one of his friends, and meant also that the plot would come to light, as the swallow is a domestic bird, friendly to man, and the most talkative of all birds. So, putting this together with the story from the Persian, he sent Amphoterus, the son of Alexander and brother of Craterus, to Parmenion, with some men from Perge to accompany him as guides. Amphoterus wore local dress to avoid recognition along the way, and reached Parmenion undetected. He did not bring any letter from Alexander. It was not thought sensible to commit anything to open writing in a matter such as this, but delivered the message he had been charged with orally. And so the other Alexander was arrested and kept under guard.